Hi, my name is Catherine Ferguson. I have some new drawings that I want to tell you about today and some new wire sculptures. Those of you who know my work are going to be surprised because I have been working with color for the last couple of years. And for the last year, I've been doing a lot more color, working with these one-man band drawings. Now, let me tell you the source of my inspiration for these drawings came from friends who are one-man bands. They have their accordion, their keyboard, their violin, their drums, and as well as other instruments. And they they make tracks and they layer these together, which is unlike the one-man band that I was first introduced to at a chicken restaurant here in town. And this man was playing everything simultaneously, and there was a humor to it, but also a chaotic feeling and a management going on of multiple things at the same time. So I see this, I see this really as metaphors for all of us and our lives and what we're juggling, sometimes more diverse than others, sometimes more chaotic. But everything you'll notice in these drawings are connected. And also, for those of you who are familiar with my wire sculptures, you'll find elements of the wire sculptures in here, the line and the knot. Everything in the one-man band drawings, you'll notice, everything is connected. And when this moves, then that moves, and on and on. There's perhaps a little bit of a domino influence here, but also a circus act that I saw in Spain quite a few years ago, where things were suspended, objects, household objects primarily, and if you pulled on this one, then that one over there and that one over there moved. And so there was a mystery to why things were moving, but they were definitely all connected. So that's a big part of this metaphor. But the humor of that original one-man band that I happened to see, where he was playing his drums, using his feet, his hands, his mouth for an accordion, and a funny face on the front of his drum that every time he hit it, the eyebrows went up. So I associate humor with that. Today it's totally different for one-man bands, but because what they're doing is layering tracks that began with the Beatles and the Beach Boys. But they're adding layers and making connections, and in the end, it's a composite of elements. It's very painterly, if you think about it. If you notice the numbers when you look at them, you'll see how they've evolved right into the pandemic era. So this was one of the early ones, and this was number 4. But you can see my wire very evident in this one, and they influence each other. The drawings I was very pleased that the drawings are influencing the sculptures, and working with the wire is also very much a part of the drawing. When I'm drawing, I almost feel like I'm manipulating the wire. I always have associated humor with one-man band. However, things are different today for musicians, but in a way they are still connected to the one-man band. If you'll notice in my drawings, everything is connected. and affecting the movement of the thing it's connected to. So there's nothing that's isolated. I started this series in early 2019, I think. And of course it's gone through that year and into 2020, and particularly the pandemic months. And I think it's influenced them. At the same time I was doing the drawings, I was also working on my wire sculptures. The wire sculptures started 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and I could continue to do them. They're much lighter and they're easy. They're very easy in that sense for me to do without using a foundry. In the past, I've done large outdoor public works that required using a foundry, and those are pleasurable to do, but these are more pleasurable because it's hands-on and I manipulate them in space. The wire work has been a fascination of mine for quite a few years. It's light and manipulable. It's in my control, the shape of it, until the very last moment. It's like line drawing, very much like line drawing, but it has the added strength of when it is on the wall and lit properly, of creating additional shadows and line work. My sculptures have always been about the containment of space generally, and there is a lot of space that's defined in these wire sculptures. Some of them have heavy black knots. They remind me very much of the cosmos, the density, the connections. It varies. These vary, and I find that the more I draw, the more the wire sculptures change, and probably vice versa. The second series that I'm showing in this exhibition is a group of diptychs. Some of them are more one-man band images. So the diptychs, I find even at home, I'm taking postcards or images and tucking them in the frame of something else that might be on the wall that I think relates. I like the conversation that you get when you look at a diptych between the two parts, and the questioning of why these two images. Sometimes it's very obvious. It might be just that design-wise, they have very similar elements, colors, shapes. Other times it's totally in my head, and there are moments when I think that nobody else is going to get this connection, but I feel it. And I have only a feeling that they should go together. Sometimes I put images together and there's no perhaps logical or rational reason for putting them together, but I feel, there's a feeling I have that they should go together. This diptych, called Luxembourg Gardens, was one that I did this spring when I stayed near the Luxembourg Gardens. It was early spring, things were just beginning to leaf out. And with it, I put the part of trees that they trim in this fashion that are create quite elegant shapes. This diptych is called Traveler. The figure on the right is similar, but not exactly, in the shape of larger outdoor sculptures that I've created. But I've always been drawn to the black, strong silhouette. The diptychs are a lot of fun for me because I go into my archives and I find maybe a photograph that fits with a drawing, as in the case of this alpaca. And then there's some, they go way back, where this black coke is hanging and it's juxtaposed next to a gold spoon. Sometimes there's a rational connection or a visual connection. You can't find words to describe it, but I know that these two images, I feel, should be put together. They feel good to me. They resonate. I couldn't put it into words why. In skirt, you can see that the wire work from my sculpture is influencing both of these drawings. I'm also thinking of this very much as, of course, metaphor for all of us and how we live our lives. And sometimes there are more elements to be balancing in our lives, and sometimes not.
Hi, I'm Barbara Kendrick, and I'm part of the Joyous Occasion exhibit here at Modern Arts Midtown. And delighted with the title because it is a joyous occasion to be able to show art again. A little bit about my background. I went to school at the University of Nebraska. I lived in Lincoln for many years. My husband was a professor there, and I brought up my children there. I went part-time, starting out as a printmaker, and then I went to graduate school at Ohio State University, where I became a painting and drawing major, but I was also doing sculpture. So I've always enjoyed working between all those mediums. And it gives me a lot to draw on when I'm making my work. And now I'm making digital work. But back to my background a little bit more. I came to Omaha 2 years ago, but for over 30 years I lived in Illinois, where I taught at the University of Illinois in the School of Art and Design, in the painting and drawing department. And I was fortunate to be able to do a lot of travel, which has been very important to my work. And I'll be talking about that in relation to one of the pieces, because part of what I do when I travel is I take photographs. And then in my studio, back in my studio, I use parts of those photographs in my collages. And that's kind of a source for me, one of the many sources that I draw on when I make my collages. I look at collections in museums, online, and digital collage is something that I've come to in the past 3 or 4 years. And it was in part because I have arthritis in my hands and knees, and I was doing installation work, but it became very difficult for me to use the small tools, to climb up on ladders, all of the things that you need to be able to do to make sculpture and installation. I'm very fortunate that I found a new medium to work with, and that's digital collage. I've been working with collage for many years, and I still work with what we call now analog, which is cut and paste, but the new term for it is analog to distinguish it from digital. And I still work with analog, but I've begun to have a preference for digital because of all of the tools that are available to me and all of the objects and places and images, just images that I can use. I'm a visual scavenger. I really seek out a lot of different kinds of images, and I'm drawn to certain ones, and then I begin to use them in my collages. So, for instance, one of the pieces that I used my online research for is called Stigmata. The face comes from a photograph that I took of a railing covered with plastic in Brooklyn one time, and then I transformed it through Photoshop to change the color. The hair is made up of a nematode. Some of these reasons are kind of obscure to me at the beginning. It's only when I put them together that I begin to understand them. So I looked for pink rubber gloves, and then finding them, I distorted them and put a dot in the middle, and that's how it became a stigmata, a kind of domestic stigmata. If you see the title, sometimes I think people get a little confused or believe that the title is where I began, and it's not. The title is where it ends. It's only after I look at it and decide what it is that I give it a title. When I'm making the digital collage, I draw on my knowledge of composition, of color, of line, and then there's something else that goes into it. For lack of a better word, I'd call it improvisation. And I think of the pieces as being kind of similar to what a jazz musician does, taking something familiar and giving it a twist. When I'm working on it, there has to be a visual surprise for me. The Age of Anxiety is one that I did near the end of March 2020. I was listening to things about COVID, but I had a lot of anxiety, like most of us did. I took one of the photographs that I had done on a trip to Amsterdam. It's pretty interesting because it's the reflection of the ceiling of the Rijksmuseum coffee shop in a teacup. It just kept layering and layering and layering. And that's when the title came to me rather quickly, The Age of Anxiety. Another one that I made during this time is called Visitation. It's as this person with a strange kind of mask on. It's kind of like an elegant PPE, actually, I think. And then the rubber gloves. And then he has a thought balloon that has the image of the COVID virus. Someone is visiting that's, in this case, an unwelcome visitor. Another piece that uses photographs that I've made myself is called Roman Eyes. When I was in France, I visited a museum that had Roman mosaic floors, but only had parts of them. And so a lot was obscured. And one day when I was zooming in on the photograph, I saw that one part of it really indeed looked like eyes. So the Roman eyes comes definitely from that mosaic floor. So again, it's like taking bits and pieces and then putting them together in a way that's sometimes harmonious, but sometimes it's more like they're rubbing up against each other to create a kind of friction, kind of disruption of what you expect. And then the improvisation takes you further and further away from the melody until you don't know how they're going to get back to the original melody. And then, so that's some of the things I think about.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us during these crazy times. My name is Chris Cassimatis. Most of you know me as a sculptor, and I am very happy to introduce to you with this show another side of me. We are opening a show with 9 paintings on canvas and 10 works on paper. It could be considered all as one series, which started on paper and developed to a point where it needed to get bigger, and that's what led to the canvases you see behind me. My sculpture practice, which I've been very intensely operating under for many years now, from Omaha to Salt Lake City, needs a giant studio space, which in Salt Lake City I had 1,000 square feet. Moved to Chicago just recently with my wife, where she's finishing her medical training. And I decided to take the opportunity to focus on two-dimensional work once again, which is really where my artistic career started. All the things I learned over the years as a sculptor have been applied to this work. As I was working on paper, and then as I moved on to canvas, I discovered that the paintings worked better the more I related them to the way that I worked with sculpture. And I decided not to approach canvas as a painter, which is what I would have done in the beginning before I spent so many years as a sculptor, but rather approach working on canvas as a sculptor. And the more I did that, the more I found that the work spoke to me, and the more I found that it was an easier process. I have always been interested in both architecture and structure and how things are put together. Elevation number 2 is a really good example of this. So you'll see that I have continued some of my interests, which were very clear in the sculptures, such as form and shape and negative space. All of those have been translated into painting. One beautiful thing that allows is the addition of color, which in stone sculpture, I can choose colorful stones, but it's not the same as being able to express multiple versions of color in the same piece. So while I have lost the three-dimensional space, I have added the dimension of color, and that transition has felt really good. So I'd like to address how these paintings relate to the sculpture. Pretty much all of you know me for sculpture because that's all I've been doing for the last 10 years as a full-time sculptor. I actually started out my career as a two-dimensional artist in college and before even. It wasn't until my last year of college that I actually took a stone carving class and really never looked back. From that point forward, my drawings all related to sculpture. They informed the sculpture, they decided details, all the things that a drawing can do for a sculpture. That's what my drawing became. A recent move to Chicago, where it is very difficult to set up a stone carving studio, gave me a choice, and rather than force figuring out a way to carve stone in Chicago, which seemed very complicated and all the things, very difficult. I decided to take the opportunity to go back to two-dimensional work. So there's been this full swing all the way back to working on paper and drawing and even painting on canvas. Having spent all that time drawing for sculpture and working on sculpture, I find myself still feeling like a sculptor, even though I'm working on canvas, even though I'm working on paper. The more that I have brought all that I learned from sculpture into the two-dimensional work, the better it speaks to me, the more it seems to be working. What I found my interest in working with stone and stainless steel and steel is form and shape and negative space and clean lines. Really, if you look at my stone sculpture, probably the thing that stands out the most, particularly from other stone sculpture, is the clean lines that I spend hours and days and weeks making just right. These are the things that I have brought over into painting that I think make it stand out and make it relate. So, in spite of being a new medium, I do very much believe that these paintings are a direct descendant of the sculpture that I have been working on for so many years.
This piece, The Buoyancy of Shapes, does a really good job of illustrating something that I find very exciting about painting, and that is the ability to create a setting for the shapes that I create. In this case, as the painting developed, I noticed that the elements had a certain connection that had a feeling of floating, and I decided to emphasize that by creating this watery world.
All of my interests have remained the same. My interest in form, my interest in shape, my interest in precise, clean lines and how they relate to one another have all carried through.
Another characteristic of painting that I find very intriguing is on display in this piece, Delivery Mechanism. Because of the directness of painting, it is actually possible to incorporate the day-to-day events that occur. And in this case, being made in the early days of COVID, one of the big topics of conversation was about supply chains and the movement of goods and resources around the world and to our doorsteps. And all of that really seeped into the work. Over the last year, I have really delved into the idea of painting and working in two dimensions. And putting together all the pieces for this show has been a really great opportunity to step back and look at how it's all played out and how I really think about all these things. My current plan is to continue developing and exploring all the possibilities of the medium. I look to do this exclusively for at least the next 2 years, and after that, I hope to really be able to balance out a practice between sculpture and painting because they truly do relate to one another. And we'll see. As much as anyone can make a plan these days, that's mine.
Before you give it any kind of a talk, there's what you want to say, what you say, and what you wished you'd said.
Yeah.